What's up, boys? Happy to see everybody back for another episode of the BGO Blind Pig Podcast, courtesy of bgobsession.com, for another wonderful little positional breakdown. Before we get started, of course, as you guys know, if you've been here before, give us a like and share, and if this is your first time with us, hook us up with a follow. If you're listening out in the audio world, you can also find us on YouTube and vice versa. If you want to just listen to us on the audio podcast, we're on most audio streaming platforms, YouTube, Facebook, all the socials, and of course at bgobsession.com.
I think it might be a reflection of our personal appearance and charm because
That we have a lot more listeners.
We have a lot more listeners
viewers.
as time goes on, about double. But anyway, it's really easy to listen on the audio, so I get it.
Right. So, before we kick things off, Bob or John, you missed last week. You want to fill us in on what you were doing last week and what was more important in the podcast?
Yeah, I think I had a soccer game I had to go to. My brother has Charlotte Football Club season tickets. If you've never been to one of their matches, right there in Panther Stadium downtown. He's at the 50-yard line on the end of a row. So it's like hop up, go to the bathroom, grab a beer, come back. It's really great seats. And I tell you what, the NFL, and specifically, if for some reason Mr. Harris ever listens to the Blind Pig podcast, they really need to go down there, and because that franchise has only been around this is their third season, and they have more fan engagement and more like the greatest swag ever. They already have like traditions that, you wouldn't think a team that had been around for 3 seasons would have a bunch of traditions, but they do. It's amazing. I mean, I think it's probably a lot like going to a Premier League match, with all the passion and just a lot of tradition. And anyway, so that's what it was last time.
So I'll ask, what do you think of, because we kind of touched on it in the last podcast, what do you think of this whole Aiyuk situation?
I'm kind of out of touch with that Aiyuk situation. I know he is posting stuff that people think he probably shouldn't be posting. I saw that commented on, but I don't know where we at with that.
So the latest is that nothing. Apparently there was an offer in place from the 49ers at the combine. Am I remembering correctly? It was either at the combine or at the Super Bowl. I can't remember, where the 49ers officially made an offer to us and we turned it down. I guess it was too rich. And then now Aiyuk has been pictured multiple times with Jayden Daniels and some other, questionable activity. I guess the most questionable thing is, as most recently, Aiyuk shared a picture, or what appears to be a picture of an iPad where there was film from training camp, or from the mini camps. And that's where people are kind of worried, like, what the hell are you doing? Is this Jayden Daniels? How does he have access to this information? This is, we don't just want our competition being able to watch our mini camp film as we're installing new plays and stuff. So that's kind of where we're at. But would you trade for Aiyuk? Let me put it that way.
I mean, I'd give a future if we could get him for like a second rounder next year, I'd do that in a heartbeat. But I just don't know. You got to be concerned about is he going to pull this kind of crap here? You know what I'm saying? I think players don't always think about that. Like, look, it's not just your current team that's watching this go down. Your potential future employees are watching it too. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, here's the thing. We already have a wide receiver on a first-round contract, a second first-round contract. I mean, think about it. McLaurin's being paid like a number one. Aiyuk's going to want to be paid like a number one. I'm not giving up a number two, not unless he's willing to sign a long-term contract that's friendly, and it's not what he's looking for. That's why things are sideways in San Francisco, because they've already signed Deebo Samuels to that. They don't have the space. Samuels, they know
McLaurin's not making the kind of money that Aiyuk would get either. That's where you got to worry.
Right,
exactly. Create a problem where you don't have one to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean, Sam, let's see, McLaurin signed a 3-year deal, which means he's coming back up
Mm.
Yeah.
next year.
I believe 24 is the last year he has guaranteed money.
Right. So what that, what that tells me is the team is either trying to figure out how to replace him or how to re-sign him, one or the other. And Ayuk may be a replacement on the field, but he is not a replacement in the locker room from what I am seeing right now in social media.
I
You
think
wouldn't be seeing any of this crap from Terry.
I think a good thing is we have Adam Peters, so he just came from San Francisco, so he would know his true value, and he would know what Ayuk is like behind the scenes, and if there's anything to be worried about or whatnot. So, I think it's good that he would be making that decision.
Yeah, no matter what decision, whether they choose to trade for him or they choose not to trade for him, I'm confident it's the right one because you have to believe they're coming from the right headspace. It's not, the scary signings of the the early 2000s. So last week we ran down a couple of different position groups. Quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, running back. Today we'll kind of flip and do the skill position groups on the defensive side of the ball. I figure we kind of had assigned teams, and then so we can kind of run that back down again. Starting D line, we're gonna start interior D line. So I'm gonna throw it to brother Tony. You want to kick it off?
All right. Yes. I had the Giants again, and their interior, they got Dexter Lawrence. He's their like stud alpha, big time player. Then they got Nunez Roches, Jordan Phillips, and then some other depth guys. So, the main big player is Dexter Lawrence, and they try to feature him on their defense, and the other guys are kind of solid fill-in kind types or like depth types, but nothing that I don't think people game plan for other than Lawrence.
Well,
Yeah, so I had the Eagles, and the Eagles got a lot in terms of their interior on their defensive line, especially in terms of potential. They got two really high picks in Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Both of these guys were first-round picks, top 15 picks for the Eagles out of Georgia. So, I mean, their situation, you kind of expect that these two guys are going to do what we've wanted John Allen and Daron Payne to do, and that is flat out dominate. But to this point yet, they're not quite there. There's definitely a lot of potential there, but these guys still got a lot of growing up to do and a lot of experience still to gain in the NHL, in the NFL, I should say. Sorry.
They got experience to gain in the NHL too, Paul. You are
that's
not
right.
wrong.
Yes. This is the Canadian in me coming out. I'm sorry. So Jalen Carter would definitely be the better of the two to this point. He had a really solid rookie year last year. He put up I think it was 6 sacks. If he builds upon what he did last year and doesn't take a step back, I think the rest of the division might be in trouble. Jordan Davis, he's a guy that's flashed, but he hasn't quite put it all together yet. When I was doing a little bit of research and a little bit of reading, they were indicating that he's a guy that has been really putting in the work this offseason to get himself in the right physical condition to become the dominant player that they hope that he's going to be. I think the big question with the Eagles on the interior is Fletcher Cox is gone. So he's a thing of the past. And I mean, that guy's been a staple on their line forever. And they're going to need these two young kids to step up and carry the torch. Are they going to be able to handle an increased workload? They definitely got some enormous shoes to fill. And with that comes, added pressure, added expectations. And are they going to be able to handle that? That's the question moving forward. But I mean, talent is definitely there. In terms of depth, they got some guys that have played in the league. They got Milton Williams. He had 10 starts actually for them last year. And Marlon Tuipulotu also entering his fourth year in the NFL. So they got a lot of interior D tackles on their roster. They didn't draft one. So they're probably comfortable with the depth that they have behind Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. So but definitely they got a lot to work with there. So very talented.
Bob, you want to encapsulate the Cowboys?
Yeah, they're either really young or they're really old at defensive tackle. And I would also point out that one of the guys they had planned on penciling in as a serious rotational guy about this point in his career is wearing burgundy and gold. That would be one Mr. Ridgway, who they originally intended to be, like a third guy or a fourth guy in that rotation here. And we picked him up right off their practice squad a couple of years ago. And now he's filling that role for us and he's doing fairly well. But yeah, so guys you've never heard of, right? Chauncey Golston, Golston, fourth year player out of Iowa. Now, the other name, for those of you that pay attention to BGO in the offseason, specifically our draft podcasts, somebody brought up Mr. Odigizua. I want to say it was Mark. He was out of UCLA, right? And he's played fairly solidly for Dallas for several years now. But behind them, it's rookies or it's guys in their 30s. And this is one of those places that Dallas fans down here and the sportscasters were all thinking there would be some movement in the offseason. And there's been absolutely nothing on the defensive line as far as bringing in free agents. Nothing in the middle, and we'll talk about it in a minute when we get to edge, but nothing on the edge either. Dallas just hasn't spent any money. And it goes back to last week's conversation about free agency. They're staring at paying big names, and there just isn't a lot in the bank right now. And I think you're going to see a difference in this defensive line this year because of that. And I think the interior is going to be one of those places. An injury, and they're playing with guys that they have no intention they're going into the season with no intention of guys playing big roles. So.
All right. I can do a quick rundown of the interior D line for Washington this year. Obviously, returning, you have Payne and Allen, as well as to your point, Bob, John Ridgway and Fedarian Mathis, who is a giant flaming question mark at this point. Notable off-season additions is probably Johnny Newton. He's the most the one that might have the most impact by the end of the season, coming off 2 foot surgeries. So chances are we won't know very much about him until after the first quarter of the season. Honorable mention are guys that can be kind of two-way players. With Obata, he played interior and outside a couple different times, as well as now I'm spacing on his name, and it's escaping me. But they're depth guys, they're rotational guys, they're not anybody huge. So the Great Wall of Alabama, we've had expectations. It's kind of that year to put up or shut up. John Allen's going into the final year of his deal that's got guaranteed money on it. And Deron Payne just signed an extension last offseason. So we're at a crossroads about what our future is going to look like on the interior D line. I think we could look into this season and say, very reasonably, we could either see both Payne and Allen back on this team next year, or we could see neither one of them on this team next year. So it's going to be interesting to follow that dynamic. Allen is approaching 30. I believe he will be 30 by the end of the season. Payne is 27 and he's signed for 4 seasons. So where's that transition going to be to more of the Ridgway, possibly Newton, possibly Mathis rotation, or do we stay top heavy? So we can run real quick. John, since you were out last week, I'll toss it to you first. How do you want to rank the 4? What's your order of the NFC East?
That's hard, I think. I mean, I guess I'd probably, and again, I'm just throwing this out there, probably Philly up there at the top. I think, and again, I'm totally a homer, but I think we could really have something this year, especially on the interior. I think Mathis is probably a lot better than we realize. And I just think that with the new coaching staff and just the defense being overall better all the way around, coaching and the talent, that we're going to get a lot more out of these guys than we've seen in a while. So I'd probably put us second, Dallas third, and the Giants fourth. But I don't know. I think you could shuffle those just about any way when it comes to the D line and be able to make a case for it.
Mm-hmm. Tony, what do you got, brother?
Yeah, I agree with John that they're all pretty close. There's not like, oh, this is leaps and bounds the best. But I'm going to put Washington number one, just with the Payne and Allen. They've at least shown that they can perform, and then not always at the same time or everything. And then Ridgeway, Newton, I think are a good depth. And then Philly, I put right behind them, but very close. Their guys are young, but could be very formidable. Then the Giants, just because Dexter Lawrence, I think, is pretty good. And then the Dallas, I put at the end just because they lost players in it. Who they have now, I don't think people are too intimidated by.
What say you, Bob?
I like I'm gonna go Washington 1. For most of the reasons that John outlined of Washington 2. I think we've got the strongest rotation deep at defensive tackle. I also think at this point in time, we probably have the best coaching along the defensive line and the defense in general. Philly, Dallas, and New York in that order. So,
All right, what do you got, Paul?
Yeah, I'm gonna go Washington 1, Eagles 2, Cowboys 3, Giants 4. The reason why I give Washington the slight edge over Philadelphia is very simply because Allen and Payne have, in my estimation, produced at a fairly consistent level for a longer duration of time compared to the big guys that Philadelphia has in the middle there, and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. Is that going to be the same ranking this season compared to 2 years from now? Probably not. I think that, Philadelphia's potential will probably allow that group to leap to the top over the years. But for the time being, there's still something to be said about having John Allen and Daron Payne on your interior and feel good about that as well.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I'm gonna go Washington 1. We've already talked about it. The reason I'll put them ahead of Philly is because there is more longevity there so far. Philly 2, New York Giants 3, only because they're anchored by Lawrence, but that's all they've got, and Dallas 4, because if nothing else, I like to put Dallas last as often as I possibly can. All right, Edge. John, do you want to kick off our Edge? What Washington has at Edge? We don't usually lead off with Washington, so I figure we'd mix it up.
I didn't cover those guys.
I got you. So most notably, we have no returning Edge players of note. I think the biggest returning Edge player is KJ Henry, if I'm not mistaken, which is kind of shocking. Beyond that, and maybe F.A. Obata, you can make the argument, like I mentioned in the last part, he was kind of a tweener. Carries overs are Andre Jones, Benning Patoe. It is everything in my power not to call him Benning Potato. If you look at the way that his name is, is spelled, and that's pretty much it for the guys that we already had on the roster that are coming back. Key offseason additions, headlined by Dorrance Armstrong Jr., the defensive end that came from Dallas. He was kind of our marquee guy, signed a 3-year deal. I believe it was the biggest contract of our signings, if you want to go by actual money. It's between him and Tyler Biotish, if I'm not mistaken. Followed by Cleveland Farrell former first round pick who never really lived up to the, not only first round pick, he was a fourth pick in the draft, never really lived up to the hype going in Oakland. So you wonder what they see, what they think they can get out of him. He's still only 27, 5-year player. And Dante Fowler, who's listed as an outside linebacker. He's more of a vet guy, 8 years in the league. He was also a first round pick, third pick in the draft by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, additionally, now in addition to Deron Payne and John Allen, we've added 2 more first round picks along our defensive line. Instead of Chase Young and Montez Sweat, it's Cleveland Farrell and Dante Fowler. I'm intrigued by this group. I'm not gonna lie. I don't have a ton of expectations because we've had expectations about our D line for how long? It's been years. It hurt to see Sweat go, but at the end of the day, Sweat was our leading edge defensive end through the entirety of last season, and he only played half the year, and he still only had, what, I believe 7 sacks in like 8 or 9 games. So he still was even as much as I love Sweat, and I believe he was the better of the 2 players. You could make the argument he is still may not have even been a double-digit guy had he left, because he blew up in Chicago. So it's going to be an interesting group because it's an entirely new group at edge for Washington.
Just an aside there, we might, by mid-season, depending on how things go, we might be describing Jamin Davis as an edge rusher and not a linebacker.
Very
anymore.
true.
Yeah, that's the wild card.
Yeah, very true. He is a wild card because if they utilize him, and I hate the comparison, but I guess the parallels are there, like a Micah Parsons type. I'm not saying he's Micah Parsons, but in that same role where he can stand up and he can rush from the edge, or he can put his hand in the dirt and play end, or he can line up outside almost in a nickel slot situation and rush the passer. I agree. He could be an interesting look. The other kind of wild card is Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who is a 7th round pick out of Notre Dame. This is a very busy room. There's other guys on the team like Jalen Harris, Michael Walker, Norrell Pollard, and Andre Jones that are listed as defensive linemen and edge players. So just my rough count between edge and defensive line, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13 players listed as defensive linemen, and 5 more guys listed as outside linebacker, where at least 2 of those guys could be edge players. So it's going to be an interesting camp with that outer. You're going to have to earn it, I think. It's not going to be just because you're on the roster. There's going to be a lot of mouths to feed and not a lot of snaps to give out. So a lot of competition there. Bob, what did Dallas look like at edge?
Dude, I was actually hoping you were gonna throw it at Dallas next, since half of Dallas's edge guys from last year are
Came to
now playing in
Washington.
Washington, right? Well, you know, if I go back to the list of free agent losses, Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler figure fairly large on the list in Dallas. Really, the only holdover as far as defensive end is concerned from last year is DeMarcus Lawrence. And obviously, DeMarcus Lawrence is a fairly big name for Dallas. Interestingly enough, if you go look at the depth chart on ESPN, they are listing Micah Parsons at right defensive end at the moment, which gives you an idea what people will think about the Dallas linebacking core. Because if you're looking to get your 11 best on the field, you probably play Micah Parsons at one of the DE positions and bring in 3 linebackers because there's more strength there. They did draft Marshawn Kneeland in the 2nd round out of Western Michigan. If you go look at his draft profiles, in a lot of cases it says defensive line. He played a little bit of everything in college, although they are projecting him as a kind of a sneaky defensive end pick. He's like 6'3", 267 or something. Obviously the kid could put on a little bit of weight and probably play inside. But when you consider what Dallas needs at the moment, he's more than likely going to line up on the outside more than anything. And they're listing him as the 2nd defensive end on the right side behind Parsons at the moment. Granted, that's ESPN, nothing official from the team. The team has big gaping holes in a lot of places where they just haven't filled in the depth chart. So who knows what's actually going to happen as far as what they're really thinking. But defensive line in general, all the way across the board, is going to be a little bit of a question mark, I think, for Dallas this year. Outside of DeMarcus Lawrence, especially when they start moving Parsons around, who's going to fill the other side. So it'll be an interesting year for Mike Zimmer and company.
All right, Paul. What the Eagles do at edge?
Yeah, so the big thing with Philadelphia, with the Eagles at edge, will be how they're going to be able to replace Hassan Reddick and his production. The fact of the matter is, these guys are losing 30 sacks over the last 2 seasons that he's been able to amass. That's going to be a lot of production to replace for these guys. Unfortunately for us, and unfortunately for the other teams in the NFC East, there's still a lot there. The cupboard is certainly not bare. They added Bryce Huff in the offseason from the Jets, so he was like their big free agent acquisition. They gave him like a $50+ million contract. He had 10 sacks last year, but the big question with him is, can he be a 3-down player? He was more of a one-dimensional, one-trick pony with the Jets, and that'll be something to keep an eye on as the season progresses, the level of involvement that he has in their defense. They still got Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat has been a very effective player for them, who ascended throughout his career. He's got 6 years under his belt, and he seemed to get better and better every year. He had a really, really good start to the year last year with Philadelphia. He had like 6 sacks in first 9 games, but then after that, he got completely blanked afterwards, and his production fell right off. And I guess part of the issue was they felt that there was some overuse with him, and fatigue set in and whatnot, and just being used too much essentially led to his overall down season last year. They still got Brandon Graham on the roster. He's a 15-year vet, staple name in Philadelphia. He's more of a leader at this point in his career, a culture guy, someone that the younger guys are going to lean on in the locker room. In terms of younger talent, they got some guys that they can work with. They drafted Nolan Smith. He was another one of their picks out of Georgia. They picked him at the end of the first round in 2023. He didn't play a lot last year, but you would expect that a guy who's picked in the first round, that they're going to find a way to involve him more heavily moving forward. They also picked this past year. This might have been one of the guys we previewed in our draft pods, Jalix Hunt. They drafted him out of Houston Christian University. The guy amassed 22 sacks in college in his last 2 college seasons. He's obviously not going to probably contribute a lot in his first season, but you might be able to see him being used as like a situational pass rusher here and there. So essentially, at the end of the day with the Eagles, the big question is, again, I said it at the beginning, how do you replace Hassan Reddick? Is Josh Sweat going to be able to bounce back? And last but not least, are they going to be able to get some production from their younger depth pieces? But there's certainly a lot to work with there.
And last but not least, Tony, I think we can all agree that the Giants probably made the biggest offseason move at edge.
Yeah, going through this exercise, the Giants are usually pretty far down, but on the edge, they're actually pretty good. They picked up Brian Burns, who I know a lot of our fans were looking at too. And he's a stud, so kudos to them for picking him up. And then they got Thibodeau. He's pretty good. And then, but when he plays us, he's like straight hand.
He's otherworldly.
Yeah. He's like the defensive Daniel Jones. Like he's like amazeballs when he plays us. And then they have other good depth guys, Ojulari and Basham. I feel like whenever they come in the game, they still produce. So at edge, the Giants are actually this is actually for their team, their strong suit, or one of their strong suits.
All right. Well, Bob, how would you rank them?
I think you probably have to put Philadelphia 1, New York 2, Dallas 3 and Washington 4 at this point in time. That may play out differently over the season, but just looking at it on a piece of paper, and frankly, Micah Parsons could make the difference between Dallas being 3 and Dallas being 2 all by himself, maybe, depending upon the kind of year he has. But
What you got, Paul?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. I think I'll go New York, Philadelphia, Dallas, Washington. Definitely Washington at the bottom. That's the only one I'm really, really confident about. I don't feel comfortable putting Philadelphia right at the top because I feel they're just losing a bit too much production with the absence of Hassan Reddick. I don't know, and I really like the addition that the Giants made in the offseason with Brian Burns. I've always thought that he's a pretty cool player. I remember his draft year that he was someone that, I was kind of hoping that would be able to land in Washington's hands. But yeah, that's what I'm going with.
Tony?
I'm going Dallas 1. I just think Micah Parsons is so good, and then Dexter Lawrence is good. And then the Giants, Eagles, Washington.
What about you, John?
Yeah, I've got the Giants at the top, then Philly, then Dallas, and then Washington. But I think it'd be an ironic thing with Washington because we might lead the NFC East in sacks. It just won't be coming from the guys that we consider pure edge rushers.
Yeah.
I think they're going to throw a lot at the opposing quarterback. It'll be a lot of stunts, a lot of blitzing, and not so much just like kind of what we gotten used to with relying on one or two guys.
Mm-hmm.
In all honesty, John, I can totally see that. And I can see us not having a single guy on the team with more than 5 sacks total by the end of the year.
But
It
there's
being a
10 different
true-
guys.
Yeah, exactly. You got 10 guys with 5 sacks.
Yep.
Oh, I think I'm gonna go Dallas. And it pains me to do it, but Micah Parsons, I think, is just a different guy. It's like ranking running back rooms. The 49ers are probably the best one just because they have McCaffrey. Giants, Eagles, and then us. It hurts me to say that, but I just don't know what our edge room is going to look like yet, and I don't know how productive it's going to be, or in reality, we don't even know what they're going to be asked to do. In how many years did we watch Kerrigan and Arakpo go chasing tight ends down the field, whereas those guys should have been, perennial double-digit sack guys, and you sacrifice a little bit in their run defense because they're so good at getting after the quarterback. But next position group that we said we were going to talk about was going to be linebackers. Let's go Philly first. Paul, what you got? You're muted, brother.
Sorry, is that good now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I would say that the Eagles linebacker group is best described as one where there's a lot of name recognition, but to this point, they're a group that's largely unproven at the NFL level. But they're certainly optimistic about what they got. That all being said, so in the middle they got Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean is I feel like a broken record here because I keep talking about guys out of Georgia that they have on their defense. But he was a highly touted linebacker. I remember at the time when he was drafted, there was people talking about him potentially going in the first round. He ended up falling. I think he went all the way down to the 3rd round. The Eagles picked him up. So I mean, they've had high hopes for him. He was, former Butkus Award winner in 21, but he hasn't played a lot. He's been injured. He's had a foot injury. He's only got 4 games total under his belt in the NFL over the last couple of years. And asking a guy with that little experience to jump in at your middle linebacker spot, I think that's pretty tall order and a lot to ask. Also at linebacker, they have Devin White. We're all familiar with Devin White from his days in Tampa Bay. He helped them on their Super Bowl run. He started over 70 games in his NFL career. He just hasn't panned out though. That all being said, he was a top 10 pick in the NFL. He was actually picked 5th overall in 2019, but just hasn't panned out to become that dominant player that you would expect from a number 5 overall pick. He signed a 1-year deal with the Eagles this past offseason. Kind of looks like it's going to be more of a prove it deal. He's probably going to be banking on having a really great year and hopefully being able to hit free agency again and cash in. So, I mean, there's potential there, but there's not necessarily anybody who has proved it over a longer period of time and consistently at the NFL level. Backups behind those two, I would say bigger names. They got Oren Burks. He's a 6-year NFL veteran. He's played in Green Bay. He played in San Francisco. Also, they got Zach Bond. He was signed from the Saints. Also, a guy who's got a little bit of starting experience. He's had 14 career starts with the Saints. There's some talk that they think that he might be able to push Nakobe Dean if he's not ready for the middle linebacker spot. He was a guy that was used quite often, like as a pass rusher. He rushed the quarterback 99 times in his final 6 games last year. So this might be a little niche that Vic Fangio might be able to carve out for him at the NFL level. Who knows? And beyond that, I mean, it's just, younger players that don't got an NFL pedigree. They got Brandon Smith. He's a former 4th round pick of the Panthers. But again, very little starting experience. Last but not least, they got Jeremiah Trotter, Jr. That's a name that Eagles fans are going to get, excited about. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Given what his dad did for them at the NFL level. Sadly, he didn't produce the same way for us when he wore our colors. But yeah, so I mean, he'll be a guy that maybe is given an opportunity to compete for some playing time. He had a really great career in Clemson. But again, fifth round pick. I don't think you can expect that he's going to be able to jump in immediately and contribute. So all in all, I wouldn't say the cupboard's completely bare, but it's certainly not filled to the brim either. Beyond Nakobe Dean and Devin White, there's not much. And even with those two, as I mentioned, there's question marks surrounding them.
All right, Tony, what do you got, brother?
All right, for the Giants, their name player is Bobby Okereke. He's like top 10 in tackles and top 5 in forced fumbles. He's a pretty good player. Otherwise, they got Micah McFadden, who they're pegging as a starter, but he's just kind of like a try hard, nothing too notable about him. They also have Isaiah Simmons, and he seems like one of those guys that he flashes every now and then. There'll be a couple games he pops off, but then otherwise he kind of disappears. And then other depth guys, they drafted Darius Masau out of UCLA, and we'll see what he's got, and just other unproven guys. But for them and the linebackers room, Okereke is their standout player.
All right, Bob, what's Dallas got?
Oh, we've spent enough time on Micah Parsons. We could add him to the linebacker core, but he's probably going to play more line. So I'll leave that alone for the moment. This is the one place they did add to the team. They lost Van Der Esch to retirement in the offseason. Just too many injuries, right? The kid played really, really well when he played. The problem is he was never available. And he finally decided to call it quits. I think it was a neck injury that finally did him in. So Dallas brought in Eric Kendricks from San Diego. This is a guy that was an All-Pro in 2019. So there's some real talent there, but he's 32 years old now. I don't know when he's going to turn 33, but I guess the question is how well is he going to continue to stand up? But of course you could ask that question in Washington too, right? But he's going to be the glue in the middle. They're going to surround him with younger guys. So you're looking at Damon Clark and rookie Marist Liufu, who I'm pretty sure got some love on this very podcast in the when we talked about linebackers that Washington might draft. He was projected like a 5th round player. Dallas took him in the 4th round. They're talking about him potentially being the starting strong side linebacker out of Notre Dame. Tough-nosed kid. Another name that people who listened to this podcast a year ago will recognize is Marvian Overshawn, who lost his entire rookie year to a knee injury in training camp last year. He should be back this year. They're still projecting him to be a backup, but I really liked the kid last year, and unless he's lost something in this knee injury, I hate to see him lining up in Dallas colors this year. I really do. I think this is probably the best all-around unit on the Dallas defense, to be honest with you. Factoring in Micah Parsons or not, this is a fairly talented unit. The question is going to be whether or not they can keep these guys healthy. Dallas has had problems with linebackers being hurt. Well, linebackers not named Parsons being hurt every single year for I can't remember how long, right? It just feels like that glue in the middle isn't there all the time. So if Kendricks can turn that around and has a pretty good year, this could be a very, very solid unit that Dallas has.
All right, John.
So for Washington, I think this is the unit that got them the biggest overhaul on the roster, which is saying something. And just to review last season, we got the guys that were here last season that we got rid of. Cody Barton, he is with the Broncos now, apparently doing pretty well by what I'm hearing. Kaliki Hudson is with the Saints. And then 3 other linebackers are not employed at all. David Mayo, Jabril Cox, and Jajon Harris. As far as I know, none of those guys have jobs currently. One thing I really like before I get to the players, I love having Ken Norton Jr. leading that group. And Ryan Kerrigan, I think has a lot of potential. Not that he was ever going to realize it under Jack Del Rio, but I think with this defensive staff and having a defensive head coach, I think he could really become something. So I really like the coaches. The only returning vet of any consequence is Jamin Davis. And again, whether or not they really play him as a linebacker or not remains to be seen. But I think the big thing was in the free agency and draft, we probably went from the worst linebacking group in the NFC East to the best in one single offseason, in my opinion. We added Frankie Luvu, 6-year player, played for the Jets and the Panthers. Bobby Wagner, obviously, even just from a pure mentorship role, forget the fact that he can still play.
He could retire today and be a Hall of Famer, by the way.
Right. So those 2 guys are huge additions. And then we also added a pretty good player, Anthony Pittman, who I don't think he started a lot of games when he played for the Lions for the last 4 seasons, but he played in every game for the last 3 seasons. So he's got a lot of experience. And then we got a couple depth guys, Michael Walker and Keandre Jones. And then the big thing is we added Jordan McGee, our 5th round pick, who I think from what I've heard, and you guys can tell me if you've heard differently, but I think he's exceeding expectations so far. Like, I think he could see a lot of playing time in his rookie season. So I think our linebacker core is legit, and especially compared to last season.
All right, well, I'll tee it off. I guess I'm going to put Washington 1. By the way, to John's point, there have been a handful of critics and pundits out there that have not only said we're the best linebacking core in the NFC East, we might have the best linebacking core in the league. I'm not going to go that far yet. There's a lot that still needs to happen to be that way. But, yeah. I'll go Washington 1. I'll go Giants 2, maybe? Eagles 3, Cowboys 4. But because I think there's a lot of questions with the Cowboys. They're going to need stuff from people. Like, they're in the same situation we were, where it's like, if this guy plays above his level and this guy plays above his level, they might have something. It's not, there's not a lot of confidence there. So, yeah, I'll go Washington, New York Giants, Eagles, Cowboys. Because, again, I like to make the Cowboys last as often as possible. What you got, Bob?
Man, I'm always a little jumpy when I start putting Washington at the top of the list, and I guess I'm going to do it for the second time tonight but it feels really weird. I think the additions of Wagner and Luvu just kind of make this ridiculous a little bit, right? As long as injuries don't play a huge factor in the season, I think Washington probably has the best linebacker core starting linebacker core in the division. New York, Thibodeau's just scary, and then Philly and Dallas in that order, with the caveat that if everybody stays healthy in Dallas, they could really surprise some people at the linebacker position.
Yeah, I think Overshone, you talked about. I think Overshone was a favorite when we were doing our BGO pods.
Yeah.
As draft prep. I think there were probably 3 or 4 of us in those pods that were talking about him out of Texas. So yeah.
Yeah. If he turns into the player in coverage that I think he could potentially turn into, he could be a game changer for this defense almost by himself. I mean, he can blanket the tight end. So be interesting to see.
What do you think, John?
I've got Washington, Giants, Philly, Dallas.
Tony?
Yeah, same. Washington, Giants, Philly, Dallas. And before this offseason, I would never guess that Washington would be one. Yeah.
What about you, Paul?
Washington, Dallas, New York, Philadelphia. By the end of the season, Frankie Luvu is going to be called Frankie, I love you. I think that is a player that is a player that I think we are all going to fall in love with, given the barren wasteland that we've had to deal with at this position for years and years now.
It's kind of crazy to think that our third string linebacker now is probably our starting middle linebacker for the last 4 seasons, right? I mean,
Probably.
and you could argue that Jamin Davis isn't even a linebacker, which means it would probably be Pittman would be your number 3. And if he was here the last 4 years, he's probably a starter. And he's now probably a third string outside linebacker rotational piece that plays 60% of the snaps instead of 90. All right, last position group. I believe that we were going to talk about it was corners. Am I right?
Defensive backs, yeah.
Or DBs. We'll lump DBs into whole. I'm going to go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off and throw it to Paul with Philly first because I know Bob's going to cry when he talks about their rookie draft pick for this past season.
Yes, I definitely had that in my notes because
What, the Bob was going to cry?
well, no, I was just going to talk about how he was in love with one of the players that they've added. But yeah, Philadelphia went into the offseason with a plan at defensive back. Teams tried to exploit them last year with the pass. They gave up the second most completions in the entire NFL last year. The only team who gave up more completions was Minnesota. And fun fact, they were the team that had the most pass attempts against them compared to any team in the NFL. So, I mean, Philadelphia had a little bit of work to do in the defensive secondary, and they certainly went to work. They added Quinyon Mitchell with the 22nd pick. He was out of Toledo. He was the first corner to go off the board. He's going to be a guy that the Eagles are probably looking to have contribute on the outside right away. And the other player they added with a pick that actually belonged to us was Cooper DeJean. And this is the player that Bob really, really liked out of Iowa. He's one of those do-it-all football players, touted for his instincts, for his character, for his athletic ability. Give him a spot to play at on your defense, and he'll make it work. He's one of those do-it-all players, and a guy like Vic Fangio is definitely going to find a role for him at the NFL level. So with those 2 picks alone, they're well stocked for the future, but at the same time also have a couple of players who can come in right away and contribute. Beyond that, they got some really good experience on their roster. They got Darius Slay, 6-time Pro Bowler, former All-Pro player. He's played his last 4 seasons with Philadelphia. He's one of those guys that just knows the position. He's a steadying presence in your defensive secondary. So, all teams have a role for a player of that caliber and a player of that esteem. They added Isaiah Rogers. He's a pretty intriguing player. He's a 4th-year player. Used to be with Indianapolis. He was suspended for violating the league's gambling policy. But he's had 10 prior starts at corner. He's coming to the Eagles with some really, really rave reviews. Apparently, he really lit it up in minicamp and some of the offseason stuff that's going on. So they think that they can have a role for this guy, and that he can contribute. They're pretty well stocked at slot corner. They got Avonte Maddox, who's a longtime player there. He's got a lot of starting experience for them. He's had some injuries the last 2 years, but he missed most of last year, but he did return for their final few games of the season. So, he should be prepared and ready to go for the coming season. There's some questions regarding James Bradbury. He was one of those more higher profile players that they added over the last couple of years, but he had a really, really down year last year in 2023. The Eagles rewarded him with a pretty sizable contract a couple of years ago, and there's some talk that he might not even last on the roster and be there with the Eagles come September. Beyond that, at corner, they got some names, especially for those people who follow the draft. They added Keely Ringo. They added Eli Ricks as well. Those are guys who played at some, high-profile college schools. So they got a nice mix of veterans, experience, but also some younger players that have been highly drafted, in higher rounds that can come in and make contributions right away. So they got a really, really nice balance and can really establish themselves well in terms of succession planning at the corner position. At safety, they're pretty strong as well. They brought back CJ Gardner-Johnson. He was in Detroit last year, and he previously played in Philadelphia the year prior. And when he did play for Philadelphia in, I guess we're talking 2022, he led the league, or he was tied for the league lead in interceptions. So the Eagles are basically banking on him being able to come back and be the player that he was when he was previously on their roster. They also got Reed Blankenship at safety. He finished last year with 113 tackles. The Eagles extended him. He's only 25 years old. So basically, they got their 2 top safeties in Blankenship and Gardner-Johnson. Those guys are locked up for multiple years, and they're going to be able to provide some stability for them. So this team is well stocked not only for this year, 2024, but they're well stocked in their defensive secondary for years to come. I think it's going to be a big strength for them for a long time.
Tony, defensive backs.
All right, secondary for the Giants. I'd say a lot of it is potential. At the corner position, they got returning guys like Nick McLeod, Cordell Flott, Trey Hawkins, who they got at ODU, but Deonte Banks, who they got from Maryland, who I think is a good corner and is still ascending.
Yeah, but we don't like him. He's an asshole.
And
you heard it. You heard what he said after the draft, right?
oh yeah,
He did. He grew up a
Yeah.
fan of the Washington team, and we passed on him. So now it's like his life mission to make us look bad.
Yeah,
Basically.
that's right. Yeah, so he can miss me with that. And then this year they drafted Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky in the 3rd round. So he looks like he has the potential to be a good player, and they're thinking they'll slide him into the slot. And then at safety, they have Jason Pinnock at strong safety. He's just pretty solid. Nothing like a no frills, just a solid player. And then they got Tyler Nubin in the 2nd round out of Minnesota. who I think a lot of us were high on too. So I think he's going to be a good player.
They
based on-
lost their premier guy, right? Xavier McKinney
yeah, Xavier McKinney, they didn't bring back, and so
went to
they
the
had
Packers.
yeah. The Packers
go-
always seem to just get new secondary players. They
They
rotate
do. They kind of run
all the
through them.
time.
Landon Collins. Who was the guy that leg whipped Kyle Allen, broke his leg? I'll remember it later and yell it randomly. John, what do we got for Washington's DBs?
Well, we kind of blew up it's a tale of two two defensive back positions, because I think the safety room is probably one of the best. It's probably the strongest unit on the team, or one of the strongest units on the team. So let's talk safety first. We have Percy Butler, who I think we don't know for sure what he's going to be, but he's definitely a physical beast and has shown some flashes. Same thing with Quan Martin. We've got Derek Forrest and Jeremy Reeves, who are both pretty good players, especially Jeremy Reeves in terms of being that special teams beast that he is. Both those guys are coming off of injury though. And I believe, yeah, I think Jeremy Reeves had a ACL. But anyway, that's a pretty solid group. Then we went out and got Jeremy Chen from coming off 4 years with the Panthers, super solid player who probably hasn't played his best ball yet. And then we drafted Dominique Hampton, who I don't know a lot about, but he's a 5th rounder, so he's probably going to stick. So I feel like assuming that Forrest and Reeves can play at a pretty good level coming off injuries, and Quan Martin and Percy Butler, one of those guys, or both take another step, I think we could have a super solid safety room.
I think Chin, sorry not to derail you, I think Chin could be a sneaky good pickup. He actually,
Yeah, I like him.
he was second place in Rookie of the Year voting behind Chase Young.
Yeah.
The year Chase Young won the Rookie of the Year. So, and a lot of people would argue that he deserved it more than Chase Young did. But sorry,
I
John.
think we were talking about how we're going to bring the pass rush from everywhere. I think Chin's going to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
They send on blitzes.
I think the bigger question mark is cornerback, and we got rid of Kendall Fuller and Cam Curl. We didn't get rid of them, but we let them go. And then Danny Johnson, Terrell Burgess, those guys are not signed right now. So we let quite a few people go. I think Benjamin St. Juste, I know, fellow Canadian Paul likes him a lot, and I actually like him a lot. I just think he hasn't maybe been coached up as well as he needed to be. So I have hope with him. You guys know I'm not a big believer in Forbes, but it's still, it is only one season under his belt. But and then we got the other guys we are holdovers. Caillou Blue Kelly, who was on this team last year, but he was also on 2 other teams. Tariq Castro Fields and Christian Holmes are both entering their 3rd season. I think those are depth guys who may or may not make the roster. And then in free agency, we added Michael Davis, who he's pretty experienced. He played a ton, 7 years with the Chargers, played a ton of football. So I think he's a solid guy. Noah Igbenogany from Miami and Dallas. He's a guy that they brought in here from Dallas. And then some other depth guys. Then probably the big one that I need to mention is our draft choice, Sam Ristel. I think he could start. I think he's probably that good. So we'll see what happens, but it's hard to really know what we're going to do with the defensive backs, because like I said, safety I have a lot more confidence in. We could be pretty good on the cornerback side of the ball too. I think we just need to see how the coaches are going to manage them.
I think that Michael Davis signing might end up being a sneaky good signing with us, because Sanders still probably starts day one as your slot corner. I don't know that I start him on the outside, but everybody says he is just a premier prototypical slot corner. So depending on what you can do with your linebackers and your edge, pressuring a quarterback, Davis and St. Juste probably come in day one as your starters on the outside, and they stand to benefit, because hopefully, and the funny thing is that Manny Forbes probably is now your third string corner, and he's fighting for playing time, and he's a first round pick.
Yeah.
So if he even finds a way to be somewhat productive, I mean, and take a step forward, it would be big. And the dynamic of the defensive back room changes.
I want to see the safety group with the coaching mentality that we're going to have on defense, because I don't think you could pick a better safety group than what we have as far as like guys that love to hit and stick, and they don't always play with it like discipline and intelligence, but they always hit. So
Right. Yeah, what's the quote? He said, "We will arrive violently," is
Yeah,
what
that's
Joe
right.
Whitninger said at his press conference. So
Or bodies on people in a violent manner.
that's correct. All right. John, how are you gonna rank them?
oh gosh.
Dude, do you want to talk about Dallas?
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
No? Okay.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
We don't have to. We can skip it, you know.
No, go ahead and talk about Dallas. I'm sorry.
You know, this is a unit that may have been one of the premier units in the NFL last year. These guys had 17 interceptions for Dallas. Granted, 9 of those came from Deron Bland, but I would point out that Deron Bland started the season as a second-tier player on this depth chart. He was not supposed to be a starter, and he became a starter when Trayvon Diggs went out with a knee injury in the second game of the season. 3 seasons ago, Trayvon Diggs led the league with 11 INTs over the season and was an all-pro. So now you've got Bland on one side and Trayvon Diggs on the other if he comes back healthy. Granted, he does have a Q next to his name at the moment, probably because of that knee injury, but it happened really early in the season. And so the guy should be fairly healthy by the beginning of this season. They've got pretty much the entire rest of the unit coming back if they want them. They've got 2 guys that are unsigned free agents at the moment. That'd be Stephon Gilmore, who was a starter for them last year. And they probably consider him superfluous to needs after Bland's coming out party. By the way, he had 9 interceptions. I think I mentioned that. 5 of those went back for INTs. That is an NFL record for Bland last year. So the dude had a pretty darn good season. They also, one of those starting safeties, Jaron Kirsch, is unsigned as well, but they still have a couple of guys that are playing really well. Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker. This is at the moment, until proven otherwise, the best unit on the defense. It may be the best unit on the entire team, top to bottom. It's a real strength. Now the question becomes, will the new coaching staff under Mike Zimmer use them the same way the old coaching staff used them? And how much of the strength of the unit was based on what Quinn and Witt did with them versus what some other coach might do with them, or raw talent? So I think there are some questions around this unit, but until proven otherwise, this is probably the class of the NFC and maybe, or the NFC East, and maybe the class of the NFC as far as a secondary is concerned.
So, Bob, let me ask you, because you are kind of behind enemy lines. I don't think I have to remind Commanders fans or Washington fans how many times we watch Diggs get abused by our very own Terry McLaurin.
Mm-hmm.
And do you lean more towards what we saw last year, or do you think that there is a regression because of the fact that Witt and Dan Quinn are no longer in that room?
Well, you know, first of all, I would point out that Bland did get an INT against us last year that he returned for a touchdown. That was his record setter.
Yeah, but hold on. What
and-
were the circumstances?
Yeah, I know.
We were down by like 4 touchdowns
I
in the
know,
fourth quarter.
but the point still remains. They were picking the football off against us, and understand a lot of the pressure a lot of the success that this secondary has had is due to the pressure that the front has been getting on the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And if that pressure is reduced to Micah Parsons and Micah Parsons alone, because Micah's going to get his. I think we all admit that, right? The question is anybody else going to step up in the absence of all these other players that they've lost? And you know, we don't know yet. We're just going to have to wait and see. But I think we're going to see a little bit of a regression in this group because I think Zimmer plays a different kind of defense than Quinn and Witt do. But that's just me at this point in time. Mike's not a dumb guy. He'll figure out a way to use them. The question is whether or not it'll be that same turnover brand of football that Quinn and Witt are wedded to.
All right, gentlemen. Now I'll kick it to you, John. How do you rank them?
Yeah, I think this is a really hard one to rank, but I probably I'm buying what Bob's selling on Dallas. I do think it's not just like the defensive back. It's not. We poach so much of the strength of the Dallas defensive coaching staff that I don't think anybody could predict what's going to happen there. But until they prove that it was all coaching, I think we have to assume it was also a lot of talent. So I've got Dallas first, Philly second, Washington third, Giants last. But I think you could shuffle those any way you want.
Tony.
Yeah, actually, I'm the same. Dallas, Philly, Washington, Giants, and with the coaching of Witt and Quinn, who's their bread is buttered with the secondary. You could, by the end of the season, you could see Washington move up there very easily.
All right, Bob. I think you got Dallas 1. What's after that?
I've got Dallas 1. I'm actually gonna put Washington 2, largely on the strength of our safeties and what we've got going in depth as far as the cornerbacks are concerned. I love the Sinestri pickup in the draft. I think that kid's going to be amazing. But Quan Martin was also picked up to be like that nickelback. He's got a lot of nickelback skills too. I potentially see 4 cornerbacks out there at various points in time, with Martin and Sinestri covering guys in the slots, and this could be it could be a very interesting season in Washington. The reason I jumped us over Philly, we haven't mentioned it, but they have a new defensive coordinator in Philadelphia too. Nick Fangio is a brilliant guy, but it feels Fangio has always felt like a guy that pays more attention to the front of the defense than the back of the defense. And while Philly has thrown a lot of resources at strengthening the defense, and yeah, they did pick up that kid that I desperately wanted out of Iowa. I like our coaching and I like the talent that we've got better than what's going on in Philadelphia until Philadelphia proves otherwise. And this is one of those places that New York just needs help. New York's like, remind me of Washington in a way. They've got too many holes to fill in an off season, I think. And we've got Adam Peters and they don't. So we're doing a better job of it than they are.
I just want to make a comment about something you said, Bob, because I think on all the Philadelphia predictions, we rated them pretty highly. But you also have to look at the fact that that's dead coach walking right there. If he doesn't turn it around this year, if they have another season where they fade and don't make the playoffs, he's probably gone. And all the coaches that he's brought in to try to not let that happen, they're probably gone too. So I think there's a lot of pressure on that coaching staff.
And one other thing that I don't think we've really talked about is 2 years ago, they were a Super Bowl team. Last year, they struggled to make the playoffs going down the stretch, and they struggled against a very bad Washington team twice. It wasn't the offense that was the problem. Their defense was highly suspect last year. And I'll be honest, until I see it change, I'm not convinced that just swapping out, I don't even remember who the defensive coordinator was last year for Fangio. Granted, Fangio's a very, very good coach, but
And the other thing is now you've deleted the 2 biggest locker room leaders.
Correct.
From your locker room, and Fletcher Cox on one side and Jason Kelsey on the other.
Correct.
Now you're removing that element also.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I'll go next. Dallas. I put Washington second just because I do think there's going to be a major progression in the secondary, namely the defensive backs. I think a lot of the bad rap that we've seen on the outside has been massive coaching errors. I mean, how many times can you watch a guy get burnt before you make adjustments? Does
Wasn't
that
the
mean that
DB's
we
coach
have?
a high school coach last year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, you can watch a guy get burned a lot before you make adjustments.
But that's my point is I don't think this coaching staff is going to do that. I don't think this coaching staff is going to put up with that. So we might come out early and have some struggles, but I think their adjustments will be made and tweaks will be made. And I think you can cover up a lot of struggles along the defensive with defensive backs because this similar to the way that you can with protections. I mean, if you're getting pressure, to your point, Bob, the DBs benefit. They look better. You know
Mhm.
why? Because now they only have to cover for 1.7 seconds instead of 3.7 seconds. There's a lot of things that change in the dynamic of a defense. So I think we're going to be a little better there.
Mhm.
Philly too, because to your point also, they were so bad that they went out and they overhauled their secondary unit. Yes, I like the guys that they picked up. I would have loved to have either one of those guys on this roster, but they haven't done it yet. And then the Giants are last. They lost their biggest piece and they have done nothing to address the secondary. What you got, Paul?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to um, what the rest of you are saying. Dallas, Philadelphia, second, Washington third, Giants last. I will say in regards to Washington, um, one of the players that I'm really looking forward to watching this year and am really intrigued by is Derek Forrest. I thought he was having a really, really solid 2022 year. You know, it was really unfortunate that he got hampered by injuries and got derailed last year. But I really want to see the way that guy bounces back. I
And he's
at the
young.
time, I
And he's young, Paul. This is his fourth season, so
that's
he's got
right.
a whole career in front of him if he can play like he was playing.
That's right. And I mean, I think he was like what, like a fifth round pick? Like that guy has maximized, you know, fifth round pick status type
Oh, I
thing.
think he has
So I
well overplayed his draft status.
yeah, I'm really looking to see how he bounces back. And quite honestly, I hated the Quan Martin pick, like hated it with a passion. But if we get the Quan Martin from December, um, you know, maybe my opinion will be changed. I'll
Uh,
really look to
I heard
see
a
if he
rumor they're
can.
going to replace Quan Martin with Jartavius Martin, so maybe that's not going to be an issue. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right, boys, we've spent 2 podcasts running down this. Do we want to go ahead and say kind of our rough estimates about roster makeup in July on July 10th? What are we thinking? How are we ranking the rosters? Do this a little bit rapid fire, not a ton of explanation needed, but we can get it. I'll lead it off with you, Tony.
Oh, just overall, I think still Eagles would be at the top. Giants at the bottom, and then 2 and 3, I think is it's hard for me to say right now between Dallas and Washington.
Well, we're gonna put Washington too, because like I said, I like to put us ahead of
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I'm going to go Philly, Washington, Dallas, Giants, just in overall talent. With the quarterback being a massive question. That's the X factor.
Well, did you guys hear that Dak Prescott was in a walking boot at practice this past week? Or at the facility this past week?
I did not.
He
All right.
said it was nothing major. He just wanted to secure it while he went on a fishing trip.
Oh yeah, because everyone, just throw on a walking boot for fun. Oh,
To go out on a boat, yeah.
yeah.
All right, what you got, Bob?
I got Philly, Dallas, Washington, New York. And the caveat there is Dallas is 2 on the strength of having a veteran quarterback over a rookie quarterback. If do I
Jaden.
have the kids? Yeah. I was like, do I have it? We've thrown so many names around the night. I'm like, wait, what's my quarterback's name? Yeah. If number 5, if he, if he plays like a rookie, 3 is about where we end up, right? If he doesn't play like a rookie, if he turns out to be this, electric game-changing player that Dan Quinn was kind of talking about early on in the offseason, then we could easily be above Dallas. So,
Paul, what you got, brother?
I'm gonna echo what Bob said. Philadelphia, Dallas, Washington Giants. We just have too many new parts coming into September that are going to have to gel quickly for me to justify putting Washington at anything more than 3 at this point.
I'm going to go against you a little bit. Philly 1. I'm going to go Washington 2 because the opposite of what you said. We have so many new parts, and Dallas doesn't. Dallas watched a lot walk out the door, and they did not replace it. We watched a lot walk out the door, and we did replace it with better talent, namely at linebacker and at safety. I could argue, we didn't talk about it with safety. I could argue I like our safety room better now than I did last year with Cam Curl in it. And I like it even more with at a cost value assessment. So yeah, Philly, Washington, Dallas, and then New York Giants. New York Giants are in a tough spot. I think they're going to be lucky to win 4 games this year. Brian Daboll might be the first team fired during the season. And to John's point earlier, we could easily see Philly at number 3 here, and their head coach get fired halfway through the season.
Yeah.
All right, boys. It's been a pleasure. We are 8 days from rookies reporting to training camp. 8.
Nice.
And then 13 days from the veterans. So we are on the precipice here. We are on it is on the horizon. There's a light at the end of this tunnel. So we'll have a podcast next week. Leading up to training camp, but then it's going to be interesting. They're going to be, chins strapped and footballs flying. All right. Well, if you made it this long, I appreciate everybody. As always, you can find us on YouTube. Give us a like, share, and a follow, or you can catch us on the outside social media or on all major audio platforms, as well, of course, at bgobsession.com. Have a good night, gents.
Night.
All right.